We're in an era where doubles tennis doesn't quite get the attention that it used to in the 90s and the early 2000s. But I'm delighted to be joined today by one of the sport's greatest ever doubles players. 22-time Grand Slam champion, Olympic gold medalist, a member of the International Tennis Hall of Fame, and one half of the famed Woodies, who were one of the most successful pairs of the Open era, Mr. Todd Woodbridge. Todd, welcome to India, first of all.
Thank you very much.
This is the first time that the Australian Open has come to India for an official pre-tournament launch. And who better to do it than an Australian tennis legend like yourself?
Thank you. Well, it's a great opportunity to get to India, be a part of the Australia Fest, which is a 6-month-long program of spreading Australian culture to over 20 cities throughout India. But what better way to do that than use the Australian Open to highlight what we do in Australia, in particular in Melbourne, and sport, because sport's such a big part of our culture, and of course it's a big part of Indian culture as well.
You know, a lot of players on the tour speak about, the history of a French Open or the Wimbledon, where, of course you have a few records there yourself. But I think, over the years, we've heard a number of tennis players say that the Australian Open is the slam that they most like coming to and playing at.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I think it has a lot to do about the timing in the calendar. Because a year season of tennis is long, and by end of October, November, the players are done. So they pack up. Many are living in winter climates. They're happy then to have Christmas, get down to Australia. You start fresh. A new year has this feeling of positivity about it. So everybody gets to Australia. It's our summer. It's great weather. It's warm. The Australian Open itself it's like a party slam. It's a very Australian theme, if you like, outdoors, summer barbecues. It's that the players like. But in the mentality of an athlete is about new day, new year, new opportunity, and that's what the Australian Open brings every January.
You're obviously here with the iconic Australian trophies as well.
Yes.
The two trophies that were recently presented to Roger Federer and Caroline Wozniacki earlier this year.
Yeah.
Are you a little miffed though that it's only the singles trophies that tend to do the rounds, much like in your playing career when the single stars seem to steal the spotlight?
No, I'm not miffed, because one of the key things about my own career and any career is you should be playing every part of our sport. So that's singles, doubles and mixed. And to bring the trophies here is great. We call them Norm and Daphne, after Sir Norman Brooks, which is the men's trophy that was named after, and Daphne Ackhurst, which is the ladies' trophy. But to bring them here is another part of the journey, in fact, is to promote the Grand Slam of Asia Pacific. And what we're doing while we're here in India as well is to bring 10 young Indian kids to become a part of the Ball Kids, so the International Ball Kid program at the Australian Open. And so that's part of this journey as well. So hopefully the 10 that get selected are budding champions and want to be able to get to the Australian Open, see the stars, work on the same court as them, then come back and work on their games with huge motivation. So it's a pretty special time for them and a really important program.
I want to talk about your playing career just a little bit. You won 11 of your 16 men's doubles Grand Slam titles with Mark Woodforde. How did the two of you become a pair? Because Woodforde is a few years older than you are, and he used to partner John McEnroe back in the day.
Yeah, so when Mark was playing with John McEnroe, he's 5 years older than me, I was coming up in the top of the junior ranks. And McEnroe was just about finishing his career, and he said to Mark, I'm not going to play next year, you need to find yourself someone else. So I chose, I in a way went after Mark, because I felt like I could do well at Grand Slams. He'd already won a US Open with Mark, and I said, how about it? Will you let me try and play with you? And that was that. So we won our 4th tournament that we ever played together. We won 4 tournaments that first year, and then the following year we won our first Grand Slam at the Australian Open in '92. And from there on, our partnership became, on average, we won every 4th tournament we played throughout our career. So it was a pretty successful run.
Was there an instant chemistry Which players sort of talk about?
Funny you asked that, because not really. We actually, when Mark played with McEnroe, he played the forehand court because McEnroe was a left-hander as well. And so I started on the backhand court, and within the second or third tournament, in one particular match, it wasn't going very well. And I said, oh no, let's change. And we switched sides and we never went back because I was the better off the forehand. And so it wasn't instant, but the strengths of our partnership had to do with communication and the fact that we both were quite strong personalities, but both had the ability to lead. So when one player wasn't playing as well, let's say Mark wasn't, I could take over the team. And vice versa, if I was struggling, he could take over the team. And so there was that real gelling nature that helped us there. And typically in doubles, the very best combinations of all time, whether you take Newcomb and Roach, McEnroe and Fleming, you can take the Bryan brothers after us, they were all left-right combinations. And that was certainly a part of our success.
You're obviously very well known across the world, but I'm sure you've realized that you're very well known in India as well, because, at the end of the 90s, you played a lot of interesting, matches, battles with the Indian Express, Leander Paes and Mahesh Bhupathi. What did you, as a more established doubles team, make of these two guys as they were coming up the ranks? And was it a rivalry that you enjoyed?
Yeah, well, like Australians, Indians love their doubles and are very skillful. And, I talked about Mark and I gelling well so did Mahesh and Leander. Leander with his reflexes and flying around the net, Mahesh with being really solid, big serving and consistent off his return. So they blended well. I think for them, they came, we were a little bit more established and older than them, and then they got us at the wrong time. If you think about the one thing they didn't get, which was an Olympic medal, they really could have medalled in Sydney, but we drew each other first round. Sydney was the last event that Mark and I played together as a combination, and we lost in the final. But we still played pretty well at that event. So we got in their way a little bit. I would have loved to have seen their partnership go for longer.
Yeah. Because they seemed to break up at their peak, didn't they?
They did, and that was a shame because I think they had more slams in them. But as a combination, they were very special. And one of the great things about doubles is you need to have pairs that represent their countries out on tour, because that gets the fans behind them wherever you may be. So anywhere we played, Aussies would turn up and vice versa for the Indians.
It's been 13 or so years now since you retired. Are you baffled sometimes that the same guys who were winning slams then, Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, Serena Williams, still winning slams now?
Leander's still playing.
Leander's still playing as well.
Yeah, I am surprised. I mean, I the end of my career played Davis Cup, a semi-final against Roger in doubles. I played with Mahesh Bhupathi. We beat Nadal at the Australian Open in my last year, and they're still there. So yes, it's an incredible effort. Not baffled because they're champion players. I look back and wonder. I stopped at 34, and a lot of the players now are playing longer than that. That was about a lengthy career at 34. In my personal space, though, I'm glad I finished when I did. I think I could have gone on and won more, there's no doubt about that, but I had to make a decision of what to do with a career path, and I had an opportunity to go back to Australia, get involved with television, become a commentator and expand my repertoire into sort of hosting some Olympics and Commonwealth Games, and that's been something that I've really enjoyed. And I think if I'd have stayed on tour longer than that, I probably wouldn't have had that opportunity. So, I have, in balance, I did well, and I was very happy with, and I left the sport, fulfilled.
The reason why I actually asked that was because, you see a certain amount of consistency in the men's game. Nadal's still around, Federer's still around, Djokovic is still around, and they are consistently winning. You don't sort of see that in the women's side of the draw. We've just had the Wuhan Open, which is on as we speak, where all the top 10 seeds in the women's draw were eliminated before the quarterfinals. We sort of saw that at Wimbledon and the US Open as well. Why do you think that is?
Oh, I don't really have an answer to that, other than it's about handling the pressure and enjoying being in that top echelon space. And I think some of the women at the moment have struggled with that. Serena obviously doesn't. And the girls before, your Kleisters and Hannon, they didn't suffer with that. But this group at times haven't really enjoyed the spotlight. And that's the difficulty of it. I think there is a difficulty in this day and age as a sports person playing with the expectations of social media and so many other things that build pressure. The end of my career, those things were just starting. You really only had to deal with your television and print. Now there's more than what there's ever been, and I think that takes its toll on a lot of athletes. But this is an interesting time in women's tennis, where when Serena eventually breaks these records and she decides to retire, there's a real opportunity, as there is coming in the men's game, because that's going to change, for somebody to take control. And you know, I watched someone like Simona Halep, who was struggling to do that, but she's getting better and better. She may have a period soon where she stabilizes and does that. So you know, there's no rhyme or reason to any of this, and you know, we just have to see what unfolds.
Okay. Final couple of questions. First, you mentioned Serena Williams, so I'd like you to draw you in on that controversy that we saw at the US Open final with the umpire. It all stemmed from on-court coaching.
Yeah.
So the question I want to ask you, is it time for the sport, and slams in particular, to just sort of allow it? Because a lot of the coaches seem to say that it happens all the time and it's just not caught. Or are you a purist who thinks that that sort of, you know, gladiatorial sort of, you know, feeling of dealing with adversity on the court as a player by yourself is something that tennis should preserve?
Well, I do think tennis has something that most sports don't have, and that is that gladiatorial head-to-head that you mentioned. And I think the ability for a player to absorb what the other one throws at them, break them down, it's a game of chess, work it out, that's important. However, what came out of New York was that as a sport, we have to have continuity within our rules, and currently we don't. So the women have coaching on tour, but the men don't. The slams run their own rules. We need to all get those parties in a room together and actually say, what are we going to do about coaching? That's what came out of that whole event for me. And then we go from there and we make a decision. In Davis Cup and Fed Cup, you have the opportunity to have a captain on the court. So we have one event where we have coaching, which is great because that makes a point of difference. Right. It's very hard to police coaching around the perimeter of a court, particularly in a big stadium. Maybe you have to let that go, and maybe we don't have on-court coaching at all. We keep that purest part of the battle and that head-to-head. But let's make a decision on that. Get all of those parties in the same room and have the same rules. That'd be a good start.
You mentioned the Davis Cup, and that brings me to my last question. You've played quite a few Davis Cup ties. You've coached, captained the Australian team. So I'm interested to know what you think of the radical new format that will be implemented, you know, starting next year. Does it for you preserve the spirit of the competition as you knew it? And does it also address the real problem, which was to try and get the top players to play the Davis Cup again? But considering it, you know, takes place in November, do you see it addressing that problem?
The Davis Cup, I played 32 ties for my country, and when I retired, I held the record for playing the most. Leighton Hewitt now has that a lot higher. The Davis Cup is a unique event in our sport. I think it needs some change in format. And I've been on record saying that. I think this change is very dangerous because it's being done on the run, ad hoc. The blueprint hasn't been written, and as it's unfolding, that can be very dangerous for our sport. I think there needs to be a lot more time spent on creating an event that can be bigger. You mentioned the players playing. There was originally going to be playing 1 week, and then they put back in qualifying to appease the home and away, but that doesn't really do much because the top teams are not playing home and away anyway. It's just the qualifying teams. It's just all a little radical, and if it falls over, what happens to 100+ years of history? That's a worry. I would much rather the ITF have taken their time and worked out a thorough plan and had the backing of the players, because right now there's no certainty that any of the players that they hope will turn up, because it's at the end of the season in November, it's after a long year, there's always an attrition rate of injury and mentally exhausted.
There's also talk of a parallel event, isn't it, with Tennis Australia and the ATP, which to have a similar format.
Well, that's a different event that's been on the calendar before, many years before. In Hamburg, I played in that in the World Cup format. So yes, you're going to have two styles of events. I don't think they necessarily need to clash either. Okay. But you know, I think the Davis Cup has put itself in jeopardy. The ITF have put themselves under intense pressure, and only time will tell what happens.
Okay, thanks for your honest opinion on that one in particular. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Pleasure.